So I've been thinking about how New York City has this weird way of delaying adulthood. And a lot of that has to do with money, of course. Like, for one thing, I didn't live without a roommate until I was in my early 30s, which was sort of strange. I met this roommate, actually, when I first came to New York City in my early 20s. I came here on a Greyhound bus. Don't ever do that, by the way. It's 3 days. It's very smelly. And I met this guy, and he said, hey, do you know anyone who wants a little tiny bedroom for $300 a month? And I thought, I'll be that guy. So I went back on a Greyhound bus and came back again. Don't ever do that either. And then suddenly I lived in New York City, and we moved apartments together just around the corner on St. Mark's between First and A, right over there. And it was actually, we moved there because it was a building I had been in when I first came here. I had crashed this party on the first floor of this building, and there were all these really magical people there. They were probably just a little bit older than me, but they were old enough, that thing when you're young, and they have it all figured out. You know what I mean? They already understood New York. They were the kind of people who performed at Joe's Pub and were in bands and looked like they'd be famous actors someday. So we lived in this building for years, and finally that ground floor apartment became available, and I called the management company and I said, can I have that apartment? And they were like, yeah, sure, go down. The previous tenant had moved out via ambulance, which is never a good sign. And when I got down there, I saw the sort of destruction of their crystal meth indulgences, let's say. They had divided this railroad apartment into 2 apartments with a little shared hallway for a bathroom. As I discovered, there was the apartment in the back because there was someone still living in there when I tried to move in, which was I think was probably more disconcerting for him than for me. No one had told him to move out. And so we worked that out eventually, and I moved in. There was actually blood on the walls. Sorry, some of you were eating, I know. There were syringes around. So I did what any renter in New York City does, which is renovate the apartment myself. I got a dumpster and spent several weeks. It was actually very gross. But then I had my first grown-up apartment. I was living on my own, and I was working as a freelance writer. And if you know any writers, if they tell you that's working, just laugh at them. It was basically you wake up at some point and you do a little writing and you watch some TV, and then sometime you put on pants. And then you do some other stuff, and then checks just come in the mail. It's this most magical thing. You don't ever do anything. And this went on for years, and I was living the joy of adulthood life, watching Yankees in my boxers alone, which was great. And one day in, I would say 2008, perhaps you remember it, the checks just stopped coming. Everyone sort of, no one emailed me anymore for work. And at the same time, 2 other things happened. One was which the apartment started to revert to its natural state, which for a tenement apartment built in 1890 is pretty bad. The bathroom ceiling fell in. There was lumber and sheetrock and roaches in the bathroom and tarps, and then it was pretty bad. But the other thing that happened was that they stopped cashing our rent checks, and it was that New York dream where you find that extra room in your apartment, but this was even better. And I ran into my old roommate upstairs, and he was like, did they stop cashing your checks? And I was like, yes, shh. We're not gonna, and this went on for months. So it was this magical moment where I had no money coming in, but I also had no money going out. And the apartment was cold, and there was no bathroom essentially, and I had decided that it was uninhabitable and that I was on rent strike. And I knew what a rent strike was. That's when you put aside money that you're supposed to pay in escrow. I didn't really know what escrow was, but but this went on for months and months until suddenly one day a new management company showed up with new leases, and they wondered where all the rent was. We argued for a while, and eventually I did what they later referred to as moving out in the middle of the night. It was It was actually late morning, because I'm very lazy. We ended up I actually ended up moving with my then fiance to Florida, which is one of two places you go when you flee New York. The other is California, as we all know. And suddenly I was like this angry, dispossessed person who had fled New York City and owed a lot of money. Like, it had happened really fast that I'd become this entirely other person. And I didn't settle into Florida ever. I didn't understand what people did. It was like this beautiful, luxurious, kind of magical international city Miami was, and yet I didn't know what anyone did there. It seems like they got in their car in the morning and drove to work, and then drove home kind of early-ish, actually, and then and didn't do anything else. And I spent 2.5 years like banging my head against this city that and it was such a cliche that I was like, I miss New York. People do things there. I was terrible. Probably very unpleasant to be around. Eventually, we came to an agreement about the apartment. They wanted a lot of money. I wanted to pay zero money. And we met in the middle. And eventually, we finally had to flee back to New York City. And we were sitting in our empty apartment waiting for the moving van, as you do. And we looked at each other, and we realized that it had never happened. It was like we'd gone to Miami for a weekend, just a very long one, maybe, and that suddenly we were back here, and it just felt entirely natural. It was very strange. The funny thing too is also that my half of the rent, because now I'm married and I live in Brooklyn like everyone else, which happens. And my half of the rent is exactly the same amount that I used to pay for the apartment on St. Mark's Place. And so every month I get to look at this number on my check and wonder when it's gonna all go wrong again. Thank you very much. Have a great night.